There's a version of the internet that was never built. A version of social media, of productivity tools, of AI designed not around engagement metrics or ad revenue, but around the actual needs of family. That version wasn't probably built because the people who were raising their children weren't involved in raising capital or building code. And that is changing quite rapidly in the world. And one of the people actually leading that change is someone who's with us today. Her name is Avni Patel Thompson. She is a 3-time founder who has spent over a decade in one of the most underestimated intersections in tech, where parenthood meets product design. She built Poppy, a caregiver marketplace, which was backed by Y Combinator. She also built Milo, an AI family co-pilot backed by OpenAI. And she did all of that while she was deep in the trenches of parenthood herself, raising beautiful young children. And she was trying to solve the very problem we've been going through ourselves. She's also probably one of the most vocal voices out there who's spoken time and again about why tech keeps failing families and what it would actually take to fix that. So let's hear from her today. Welcome to the show, Avni.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, Avni, what is your mission in life currently?
Well, the mission continues. I think if you asked me 10 years ago, 10, 11 years ago when I started and my girls were really young, I think it was just what I call rage curiosity. I'd been trained as a product designer, trying to be able to figure out all of these frictions in people's everyday lives and build products and businesses to solve it. And when I became a parent, I started to feel all this friction, and I couldn't find the types of products that I thought met the really high bar and the sustainable and the delightful kind of bar of solving these problems. And so for me, it was just like, let's start pulling threads. And the lens that I've always kind of used, because I think when you're trying to do something like this that feels so vast, I think it's been really important to me that I have an anchor. And the anchor for me has always been this idea of village. And I don't mean idea as like just like our village as a theoretical kind of construct. I also don't necessarily mean it as a social construct, but I do mean it as a very functional kind of thing, so that the motion of parenting or raising the next generation isn't just on one set of shoulders or two if you're lucky, but it's distributed amongst a lot of different people. And so that was the fundamental thing that I was feeling like this modern version of parenthood was missing. And that was the thing that I was really interested in. It's like, what are all the permutations that allow us to bring that back? And so yes, while Poppy ended up being a two-sided service marketplace that we can kind of talk about, what the intention was that let's start with the people. Let's start with, how do you take, for us, we were living in Seattle. We didn't have family in town. We had moved there for both of us for big jobs. My husband was at Amazon. I was at Starbucks. We had just welcomed our second daughter. We had a 3-year-old. We were in it. And not unlike a lot of other people. And so for me, it was, when I think about village, I think about how maybe my mom grew up, my dad grew up, but also just like all of the very many ways it could be. I think in a traditional sense, village was, the place that you grew up and the people that you've known all your life. And they were maybe related to you, maybe not, but they were certainly like this aspect of time. For me, what I was interested in is I was certain that these people kind of exist in our communities, incredible kind of people. What we are lacking is a mechanism to know them and to trust them over a shorter period of time. And so that's really what I was trying to understand from Poppy. And then even with Milo, even if it looks sort of different on the outside, which is like, how do we solve the invisible load? It's the same thing. I'm trying to figure out, how do we take this thing called load, all of this stuff, and share it amongst many shoulders. So when I say all of this, it's still the same mission. A lot of people are like, oh, you've moved on to the next thing, the next thing. I don't know how it works for other people, but for my part, I'm still on the same mission that I started from day one. It's led me to different doors, different products, different all sorts of things, and now AI, but the intention is the same. And the tools might look different, the product might look different, but I'm just as passionate today to figure out, how do we give people the first principles notion of the village that make you feel connected and supported, but with the latest kind of things, which in this world is technology.
That's so beautifully summarized. I feel like it gives us a glimpse of your mom brain as well as your PM brain into one kind of a landscape. So tell us a bit more about your journey with Poppy and then with Milo, right? You did that while raising your daughters. And so you were seeing real problems at home while you were also trying to apply those same first principles while you were building these products. And at the same time, walk us through the feedback you got from the
Yeah.
community who was at the receiving end of it, right? How did that feel like?
Yeah. So that's a lot. Let's see. So the first thing I'll just say is as a first time founder, all of this was just you're just feeling your way forward. With Milo as a second time founder, I think there were certain things that I kind of understood and I could be more deliberate about and intentional, and I didn't have to necessarily build that intuition in my own self. But starting with Poppy, a lot of it was born of my own need, and I think that was really really helpful because I think if you yourself are living a problem, you're not looking external for whether this solves it or not. But really importantly, you're not theorizing whether this solves it or not. It's just you and the thing that you built, and did it solve it? And you kind of can't lie to yourself about that. You also can't overly theorize. You just sort of have to keep on going. And so that can be a really helpful starting place, especially for a lot of consumer folks or people who are trying to build and just get up and running. There can be this, I know it really well because I've done it. There can be this feeling that you're trying to turning into a school project, or you're like you're not playing house, but you're playing startup, and you're going through all the motions. When you're solving it for yourself and you're just trying to get to like the next thing, there's just the doing. And so I think that's what led to a lot of the starting kind of journey about Poppy. I won't go into the details, but really, I had seen technology as sort of the tool that I wanted to use to be able to unlock this. Was not then a software engineer. I have an undergrad in chemistry, so I would say I'm still technical, but I was not a software writing engineer. And so
Hmm.
that for me in the very beginning seemed like a very big hurdle. I also didn't have the budget. I wasn't like in any of the ways. I didn't have the funds to be able to go hire someone, even if I knew a software engineer, which I didn't, by the way, because just my background, all the different things. I didn't necessarily, I've never worked at a tech company. I wasn't in Silicon Valley. That just wasn't, the folks that I knew. And so for me, where what I had to do was I had to focus on my superpowers were. And my superpowers were understanding a problem and a problem space and the people,
Hmm.
and understanding how you could construct a product. And so my very first version, the point was not the app, the point was not a platform. In this space, it was the problem fundamentally was I have need for care, and that care needs to be like high quality, it needs to be a fit for what my family needs and the ages of the girls, and it needs to be available when I need it to be. And so it was just like sort of bringing things down to like first principles of like, okay, well, what does that mean? Can we find three really great college students who I could vet like I would for my own family, and would be interested in getting hours that like in a much easier way? Because by the way, I had to also solve a big
Yeah.
important problem for them. And then I just like, shared that with a number of families that I didn't necessarily know, but were in my community. And that was like the first kind of version that gave me greater conviction that this version could solve the problem in the way that I kind of saw it and it needed to exist. It also gave in time, because I was focused on just like consistent growth. And growth, again, I want to be very clear, not for growth's sake, but growth because that is proof that the thing that I'm building needs to exist and more people
Yeah.
want it in all the different ways that it kind of exists, like from the pricing to like the way that it exists. And so that's why I talk about growth. That's why I think consistent growth is really important. But by doing that, that also gave me something to go talk to potential co founders with. That also gave me the track record to go to Y Combinator with. And so that's what allowed me to be able to unlock a lot of the subsequent kind of pieces. And that's the core part about Poppy. I mean, like it continued. We ended up having like the best team working on a really hard problem. We had really great investors that understood. And by the way, great investors, not because I'm like they fell into my lap and it was like so easy to fundraise, but because it was so hard to fundraise, we ended up having to find the values aligned people. And so for every 50 people I'd pitch, one person would say like, I see what this is and I'm willing to kind of put the money in. And so the benefit of that, it doesn't feel very beneficial when you're doing it. But on the other side of it, when you're in the trenches, and when you're trying to figure the hard things out, these people get it, right? Like they expected it. They didn't expect it to be
Yeah.
easy. They weren't in it for like the return foremost. And so all of those things I learned as a first-time founder. And that was really helpful as we ended up realizing that childcare is very much a broken market that we now understand on the other side of it. But for me, I was just a founder trying to solve a problem and was running into these walls that felt immovable, and which turned out to be. And then it would also influence how I would go on to then work on Milo.
Wow. That is brutal, but also so inspiring at the same time because you're solving problem at the scale and pace nobody's able to probably imagine while being in that role. So that itself to me, like hats off. You're continuing on that mission, Avni. You are trying to take the space up and trying to solve the problem where desperately that desperately needs solving in a way, right? And I know you've often spoken about, like in general, about tech, family tech, which has not really done a good job at solving the real needs of family. Like, does it just specifically come from your experiences building Poppy and Milo, or is there more to that statement where you see that there's so much that needs to be done in terms of tech being there to solve real family needs?
Yeah, I think there's multiple layers to this. So first, if you're asking me from 10 years ago, there weren't nearly enough founders. Like there weren't enough people looking at these problem spaces and saying, I am going to not build this other startup or I'm not going to go to this other job, but I am going to take all of my time and attention and I'm going to go put it towards solving these problems.
Mm.
Luckily, I think we're seeing like a lot of advancement here. I think like a lot more people are seeing the need, the market, all of those pieces, and they're coming in, really talented people. More capital is coming to here. So again, versus 10 years ago, there's funds that are very much just focused on care and the care economy and all of these kind of pieces. There is the language, the understanding for those of us that were founders 10 years ago versus what is available now is also like miles apart. So I think there is progress. I think where challenges continue are there are aspects of it where like business models and the things that are going to get you big returns are not aligned well with the kinds of small, somewhat slow. And I say this slow just because like it's sometimes to be thoughtful to understand how the complexity can be unkind of raveled is harder to do than if you just kind of like just run at something and just throw something there. The way that I kind of think about it is even from P&G, what I was taught to do was you look at a problem space and the nooks and crannies of it, and you're supposed to be able to build a product that fits into those nooks and crannies. But that takes care and that takes like living right at that frontier of like what the users actually need and what that market is. I think in lots of kind of spaces where their need is so great, you can do approximations, right? So you can sort of follow the groove and it doesn't, there's like gaps within there that are like still persistent. That said, like if you have a market that needs a problem, like, one thing that is very problematic for me is like a lot of ed tech. I think because of the selling cycle, because of who the board, the school board, because who is sold to is very different than who has to end up using it. I think for that it is a challenge. As a product person, it sometimes feels like these products are built by salespeople and who don't necessarily have empathy for the end user, which often, by the way, like just to take one example, I'm trying to build a product that deals with the chaos of having 15 different school apps and all this different communication. Well, some of that isn't necessary if that digital communication doesn't make an incremental email just like completely free, right? And so if there's thinking through how does one parent or one teacher work with all of these different pieces, we're in a different kind of place. And so it's a nuanced thing because I think like what is difficult to say is like I have such respect for every founder that chooses to spend their time and energy and their resources to be able to build something that is different and improved. That said, I think we're in a complicated kind of space because like the returns aren't as clear as in like other work productivity and other kinds of spaces. And so then you end up needing to make choices of like, who are we serving and how are we doing this? And so that's why for me, it's just like a very, very gnarly problem, which is like you don't end up having like what is the right capital? What are the right product kind of instances? What are the right problems that we're actually trying to solve? But the thing that I struggle with the most, I would suppose, is I think because a lot of technology, and especially with now social media and screen time in general, because people have had such negative or challenging experiences with it, there's becoming this like very understandable, but I think not completely accurate skepticism. Meaning, can't just shove it is not technology. Like technology does not have value judgment necessarily. That there's not a good or bad. It is the people doing the building, making the choices of like how will it be used, whether there are limits to algorithmic kind of things, whether you want time in app to just constantly increase, or whether you put limits on it. Those are all choices. And so what I want to, kind of put out there is technology has extraordinary possibility, and especially AI, to solve some of the very problems that we're trying to do. I think it can coordinate. I think it can look at all of these different things in ways that we shouldn't be blowing our brains on. At the same time, it has to be built with such intention and such care, such that we're not going for just the easy wins that are just going to make a buck here or there. And again, I don't say this lightly. Like I get it. I've been under the same kind of pressures to look at return as much as we look at efficacy. But in this space, because the stakes are so high, I think that's what gets so challenging, because I totally still believe now more than ever what we're going to be able to do with technology. But if we don't do it right, we're just going to get way more skepticism and way more damage. And I do think there's sort of like this Hippocratic oath aspect for tech builders, which is like do no harm. And I think if there's anyone building in this space, I really do believe in aspiring to that and holding to that.
And that's where you spoke about so many things that I want to kind of pull apart here. One is about the social media aspect about it, and the other piece was about incentives, right? Like, what are the incentives? What are the problems or needs that tech is trying to solve? But one piece that stood out to me was, and I believe you've spoken about it, written about it on your own Substack, is we need more tech that quiets rather than tech that, sort of becomes a protagonist. And in other words, I think I also read somewhere else where if products become sticky, if apps are sticky, which means they're overshadowing your partners, they're overshadowing your teachers, peers, relationships, it means that, they have failed to do their primary job as solving a problem as opposed to taking over your life, right? So would you love to speak something to
Yeah.
that or elaborate a bit more from like the product, managing perspective?
Yeah. So again, the beauty of like starting a company is you can make it whatever you want it to be. Now, it might not get funded, or it might not, nobody might want it, but it's your prerogative. And I think for me, what has been important is like that's why me trying to build from my point of view of like my experience with like my husband and my mom and our nanny and our two daughters and all of the things that I would say like most families are kind of dealing with. It's that like the foremost question is, if I'm building something, what role is it building? What job to be done is there? And I've like done, it's not because I'm saying like, I think this, it's because I've tried pretty much everything. I've tried it to be a little assistant. I've tried it to be like a command center. I've tried it to be all of these things. And on my part, and again, this is like other people can have different needs. And I think that's what's a beautiful thing when you have multiple people solving it and offering all of these options to the market. But for my part, what I've realized is the modern world has gotten so noisy. It's gotten so noisy with all of these different things. And you know what? Like my husband and I try really hard to be very intentional about what we do. Like a lot of people was saying like, oh, you're doing too many things and you just need to simplify. And I push back on that because like we are really intentional. Our girls do like one sport. They do tennis generally, and then they do like other social sort of sports, meaning like at school, they'll all do volleyball or they'll all do basketball. I think that's important for them to be conversant in all of the different things. But it's not something like we hold our weekends to be as open as possible. We try really hard to be really intentional. And modern life has just made it such that it is really hard to live like either under a rock or whatever else it is. Like if you want to live in community and you want to live with all this, you have to live with all of these realities. That said, the best thing that we've ever built with like Milo and what it ended up growing into was this sense of a force field. And not a force field because it shut out everything and because it's like put you in a bubble, but almost this like permeable kind of thing, which is like, can we use our family values to define the permeability of this, the filter of this force field? And then what is incredible is that it can do it. It can be this force field that sort of just filters through in a very specific way. And for Milo, what that looked like, it was like we could send all of the different like noise, like whether it was emails or whatever else it was. And it was trained and built to be able to then filter it. Okay, well, this is the important stuff and this is how we're going to bring it in. And then there was a very specific kind of expected a way that it came out. In this case, it was like a daily rundown on the night before and the morning of. It was that we built something that worked for quiet, meaning that instead of my face being in like my phone or whatever, trying to read the form or what, like, today's St. Patrick's Day and like, wearing green and all of that kind of stuff, it was there in a way that everyone knew. So if it was like my mom with the girls in the morning or my husband or whatever, they were on tap. And so in a way that I was removed from the center in a very kind of critical way. It wasn't just my brain that was the center of this. And there was quiet because everyone understood there was only like one time in the morning that this thing was going to come. There was intention there. Now, that isn't to say that everyone wants it that way, but we tested it with a lot of people and it seems to have a lot of efficacy there. The point though is then how do you make it sustainable from a business model standpoint? So I think all of these conversations can't be done in isolation. They have to be done together. And what I've known from the beginning was ads add noise, affiliates take away trust. And I'm being very like sort of like high level about it. They definitely work for different kind of business models, but at a really high level, what
Yeah.
we're selling is trust. And what I wanted to build was quiet. And so none of those other and there's other business models, but like let's just be simple about it right now. And so for me, what I wanted was a very simple value transaction, which is I build you something worth paying for and you pay me money for it. Now we'd have to like test like can that work? And when we're talking about AI, there's actual costs, inference costs and things like that. But by and large, like the conversation that I think it needs to be had is one thing that I really hate is this assumption. And it's a sheer assumption that people won't pay for things. I see
Mm,
so many people walking around with 150, $200 AirPods everywhere. And like, absent of like socioeconomic kind of levels and things like that. People won't pay for crappy products. People will
mm,
pay for things that actually do the thing and do it well and time again. And so for me, that makes your team's job harder to build something that is worthy of those dollars every single month if you're a subscription. But man, that's
mm.
a challenge I'm up for, right? Like I would like to go take on that product challenge. Let's go build something so good, so delightful, so worth the money that I don't take lightly. And that's what we were able to do, but because we were intentionally focused on that. And so it's like a long-winded way of saying everything it has to be a virtuous cycle, right? It can't just be like, oh, this looks cool on Instagram or this, like, I heard about this business model. It all has to support the thing that you're trying to do. And for me, the only way we could build quiet tech is if it was so good and so central across a lot of things. It can't just be meal planning. It can't just be something else. Like, then I'm not shelling out like this money for all these different things. It made our job harder, right? Because like now we're trying to build for breadth. We're trying to build for like something that actually is very reliable because again, we're paying for it.
Mhm.
But it made it very clear what we were doing and what the bar was. And so in its own way, that was helpful.
I think quiet tech would probably like thrive in a world where we're less distracted. I'm just
Yeah.
imagining a world where we don't have second screens, where our phones, our smartphones aren't our co-parents in the household and things like that, right? And you're right in saying that, like, people definitely want to pay, families definitely want to pay for products that elevate their standard of living, make them stay more focused, achieve the things that they want to set their mind to doing, make their lives easier without all the noise, without all the chaos of trying to sim through and understand data, privacy, and all of these things, which are just getting more and more complicated, I feel, with AI. But I think you're onto something, I want to say. Yeah, I want to pivot a bit and talk more about the care mental model. I know you mentioned it in passing, but let's talk a bit about the tech playbook and like where families come into when products are being built around families. Let's say it's an app or a social media site. Most tech products out there are built on productivity and convenience, making things easier, but like they are not often built around care and around families thriving in whatever demography they are in, right? So, what would the first principles of such a care playbook look like?
Yeah, and this is something that I continue to be digging into. And I think in our AI kind of future, it's even more critical to kind of understand. Again, maybe this is where my scientist kind of background has come to, I always said like, oh, I got a chem degree, but I've never used it. And it actually turns out that I think I use it every day. These are things that I'm trying to understand and like stitch together what I've learned empirically by like doing and seeing data points, but with also like a bunch of research that we can kind of understand. I think for lots of different reasons, the technology and like the products of our like last 10, 15 years, actually even more than that, like a lot of our productivity, a lot of our tools are built towards productivity. It makes sense, right? We are trying to get as a country, like from our work lives, we want more productivity. We want to grow GDP, all of those kind of pieces. That makes a lot of sense. The ways to do that is like through efficiencies, right? And optimization and all of those pieces. The challenge is because we haven't necessarily, either we haven't looked at the home as its own domain, or we've just said, like, hey, it seems like a reasonable starting point to take the same mental models of our work lives and apply it to our home lives. And that's where I've been seeing that that's where there's a problem. Because our
Mm.
home lives, we don't have the same end objective. Like our objective in living and in having families is not one of productivity or of efficiency. And that's where, for sure, I will be the first to say, like, having Amazon or DoorDash or Instacart or any of these things, like the convenience of it, to say, like, when the kids were younger and like, oh my gosh, we're out of diaper wipes, right? Like we need them tonight. So someone is either running out, which is reasonable, and we've totally done that. It adds more friction, but sometimes that is the right thing that just needs to happen, but also just having it delivered, right? I'm very appreciative of the convenience. The challenge is when all of these things kind of add up in a personal life, such that now we've got kids that believe that everything just shows up to your door, that they're like, where are the humans? They don't know the people who are dropping off the things. This feeling of being in community, I think, is like very important. I think in isolation, yeah, there's no problem that we don't necessarily know the person who dropped off our food or the person who dropped off our Amazon package or whatever. But I think over time and collectively, I think we have to think about like, what am I teaching my kids about like living in community and how do
Yeah.
things happen? And so that's where, for me, if it isn't necessarily efficiency, productivity, convenience, and by the way, those are the values that are being embedded and encoded within our AI systems, right? Like when we're thinking about alignment or reinforcement of like which answer was more helpful, are those the endpoints that we actually want to train on for models for
Yeah.
care?
Yeah.
That's where the questions start coming up for me. And so it's not, I don't want to just be asking, I think asking the question is step one. I think we need to recognize and ask the questions. But then we need to start saying, okay, well, let's like start hypothesizing. And so if it isn't matters of convenience and they are matters of care, what are some of the things that kind of, what does that even look like? One of the things it can look like, and I'm just going to use this as an example, is I think some months ago there was I think Mark Zuckerberg did an interview around friends and AI friends. And I think he was saying, I don't actually recall what data points he was pointing to, but he was saying something like people have the demand for 15 friends and they have on the order of something like 3 good ones. And so how could we fill the delta? That's a super rational, super like, scientific, like I get it. Like it's an engineer's mind looking at like, 2 numbers and looking at a delta and saying, how do we fill it? And his answer was AI friends. And he goes on to kind of like think about that. I think for me, it's not to like, I certainly have a personal point of view on that argument, but I think that's not necessarily the point. I think for me, it's that that doesn't sit right with me. And so what would my alternate look like? And for me, it's like, I think it isn't to say like I shun AI. That isn't the point. For me, I would love to see if there's like I had a personal AI that like understood me and my kind of like social anxieties and would say like, hey, you guys go to neighbor night every Friday night. Now I end up having like little mini hits of anxiety that like I'm really excited about something, but when it actually comes time to going and doing it, like my brain starts to say like, man, do we really need to go? Maybe I'll just like, bail or whatever else it is. And so I could see a role for a really great AI that kind of understood me in those worlds that would say, hey, listen, you were really excited about this on Tuesday. And I get it, but why don't you just go for 15? And
Hmm.
then if you're like not feeling it, let like come back or whatever it is. Like that is like something that I would do for my kids. And that is something that I would want if I have someone or something that is helping me like kind of push towards a more human, I would say, kind of values that are my values, right? Like I actually do value going and seeing my neighbors and hanging out. It's just that I can overthink it. And so instead of reaching for an AI friend in that moment, which would feel easy, but I think for myself, hollow on the other side. So one thing that is important is, are we solving for first order effects, which a lot of our tech right now does? It focuses
Yeah.
on the surface and then just looks for meeting like first order effects. Like I feel lonely or I feel whatever, and I'm going to go do something like, talk to my AI friend and hit that. What I'm interested in is in like second and third order impacts. So maybe we're not optimizing for that first order impact because I'm telling you to go to this neighbor night and that's frictionful. And that is not
Yeah.
optimized. That's actually not giving you what you asked for. But the second and third order impacts that are like the things that are like better for you as parents, we know this conversation really well. Like we don't always give our kids what they want in the moment, but it is more about like what is better for them. These are some of
Yeah.
the things that I've been like really kind of digging into and trying to use these as the threads to kind of carry the conversation forward.
I see. So building empathy, encoding almost empathy and the humanness into a future version of an AI product as opposed to only productivity or the machinery elements of it, like efficiency and productivity, right?
Or maybe pluralism. Like maybe it's not just like one value that we're trying to optimize, that there's multiple kind of values that we're trying to have. And I also want to be careful. We're not
Mm,
necessarily trying to encode all things human, right? Like I actually have a question
mm,
about like how much an AI system can have empathy, because like true empathy is having this lived experience and like this aspect of like a connection. Maybe that's something that is preserved just for humans. But the challenge for me is that I think it's really hard for an AI system to match the curves of care if they don't understand what the curves actually look like. I'm not saying I need this AI thing to do the care in the way a human does, but it's not even going to be able to help me with the work of care if it doesn't understand all of the stuff under the surface of like how I come to the decision of how I care.
that's true. That's very complex, right? Because that's, like you mentioned, a role only a human brain or a human person can solve it. And it varies from family to family, from regions to regions on how they go about approaching any kind of problem that they're solving within their family, outside of their family. Yeah,
I mean, yes and no. So I'm going to just push to
it's
that's what I'm trying to see. Like, is it? Is it too hard to be able to do this tacit knowledge that we know culturally? Or is there
mm,
something about you and I live very different lives from a sense of like geography and like,
yeah.
age of kids and things like that? But I would argue that if I was called to support your family for a weekend of like,
Hmm.
trying to figure out like what the meals are, what care looks like, and all that kind of stuff, there is a set of knowledge as a fellow parent that I would have to ask you some questions about how your family does it. But I have a great level of confidence on this side of also serving thousands of families that as a parent, I would
Yeah,
understand how to get at least 80, 90% of the way there. And so
absolutely.
then it's understanding, well, what is that then? Because if we're trying to figure out what's for dinner on Tuesday, what is the logic chain of reasoning
Mm,
that goes to that? And what I'm suggesting is that the current AI models don't understand that because they weren't given the right data and the right instructions and the right reasoning on that. But it's not possible. That if we
mm,
gave it the instructions to say, hey, first look at the calendar and see who has soccer and who's traveling, then understand that this week, the kids are like not into like this thing or the other. And it's just such a crazy week at work that I'm going to need super simple kind of stuff or whatever else it is. Like as a parent, I would think through all of those different pieces. My question is, if you do that, could you build something that can be supportive and can be kind of trained? I'm not saying
absolutely.
the aspects that are encoded that wouldn't be able to be turned into actual explicit statements. But I am saying I think we actually know more than we give ourselves credit for.
And at the behest of sounding a little bit stupid or reductionist here, I want to say a lot of that load falls on the mom, the woman in the family, because I mean, at least from what I've observed with my friends, with myself as well, no matter how much my partner, my husband shares the load with me, so much of it, like mentally speaking, rests on a woman. So in extension, I trust a mother or woman building such an AI product or like such tech systems that actually embodies care over somebody who doesn't understand what it means to be in that kind of shoes, right?
Yeah, and I get that. Like, I think I would want someone building a medical AI to have medical expertise or legal, I like it for legal expertise. And so in this space, it's no different. I think for generations, women are the ones who have traditionally done the work. It's where the expertise is kind of like passed on and where it
Yeah.
lies. And so even if we're doing this work, I think you need representation from a wide range of what care looks like. So I would even want, like, how does my mom or my dad think about it as a grandparent? And how do like caregivers like nannies think about it? I think all of those points of view, how does a neighbor think about it? Like, I think all of those points of view are really important. But
Yeah.
to start, why wouldn't we just start with the experts? And in so much as the experts are the women or the moms, I don't think we have like, I don't think we need to make our jobs harder than it already
Yeah.
is. Like, so many things are gendered and like all of that kind of stuff. It can also be true that it is gendered. We can use that as a positive to say, these are the experts. What if we got 10,000 women, mothers across like globally, and we had them in code? How do you think about what you're making for dinner today? How do you
Yeah.
think about what your weekend schedule is this weekend? How do you think about a neighbor is ill? What should you be doing? And if we got
Hmm.
these 10,000 mothers to write that down and encode it, like these are the things that I'm trying to think about, which is like, hasn't been done before, but why couldn't it? And let's
Hmm.
start with the experts. Let's see what we get from there. And then built of moms by moms. That
Yeah.
sounds like it could be really
That sounds,
interesting.
yeah. Where's that
And then
right
you
now? You
layer
know
in the
that,
other points of view. Yeah,
yeah. You see that video on social media doing the rounds saying AI is going to take over my job and a
I know.
mom
And why
trying to
isn't
fill
it
the
doing this one?
laundry.
Totally.
Yeah.
But like, and I like, I so feel that, but I think because I've been doing this work, I'm like, we should expect it. We
Yep.
should demand it, and we should hold it to the high bar that we need it to. Because let's talk about this right now. Robots are being built explicitly trained against things like laundry or cooking or washing dishes. That is like, I could name probably 10 companies working on that right now. What is so a lot of these people are building what you would call the physical intelligence models to be able to do that, the embodied knowledge, right? That isn't in large language models because that's text and that
Yeah.
doesn't accurately reflect what it feels like to be in space. But as we're thinking about bringing these robots into our homes, I, at least for my part, would want it to understand the role that the acts of love that laundry or cooking or washing the dishes play in a home. So it's not just the transactional thing of like, and by the way, sometimes laundry or doing the dishes can be a fully transactional thing. Just get it done. I just want the thing done. But I think that's where we want to be careful, where it is a slippery slope, where we just say, just take care of the task for now. That's where the delivery to the door and everything starts. And in time, what ends up happening is it feels like a hollow kind of aspect. And I just want to be able to think through at least what could an interaction look like that felt
Hmm.
totally fine, that we're handing off the work that where we don't find meaning and it does pure work. And how are we having conversations of like, nope, tonight I want to cook because, tonight is like a family dinner night. I would like your support to help like share the 5 like, family recipes that I like usually love to make. But this is a you supporting kind of role, as opposed to on
Hmm.
Tuesday night, my husband and I are like running into the kitchen and I'm like, okay, you can just make dinner and we can sit and catch up over a glass of wine. I think all of that is possible. I think we just need to have like the intentionality and the resources to be able to then go work through all of these really gnarly kind of things and not too quickly reach for things that are built that were never meant to be built for this space.
That's true. Not just aiming for convenience and that band-aid fix in the moment, but like really thinking about intentionality, as you mentioned, right? I want to pivot a bit and, speak about parents and raising kids in the age of not just social media, but also AI, since you're a parent yourself, right? You've seen the transitions that the decade has brought into everybody's lives from like smartphones, the internet, social media to now ChatGPT, all kinds of LLMs out there. One of the biggest worry parents have is that A, world is moving too fast, and B, they're not upskilled enough, or they don't know how to raise this generation to teach them what digital hygiene looks like, what privacy looks like, because they themselves don't know it. So for such parents, what would your advice be? And if there are any tips or tools that they should upskill themselves with, where would they go to find that?
Yeah, this is such a tough question because I feel it every day. My girls are now 11 and as of yesterday, 14.
Oof.
And we're in it, right? Because we're in the ages where all the friends are getting the phones. It's all of those different pieces. I just got off the phone with a friend and we're just trying to like work through like we haven't given two of the last parents to have not given our kids phones, and we're just struggling because they are missing out on like certain social interactions and things like that. And so we're just trying to navigate like what does that mean? I think in any of these things I really do try to come back to first principles of like what is it that we're trying to hold to be true. There's always going to be side effects of any kind of decision, but I want to kind of think through you're going to be wrong on one side or the other. No decisions are perfect. No decisions are like unilaterally right. But which way would I be okay with being wrong? And I think for my part, I'm okay if we are too stringent on the no phone policy and we are the way that we are wrong was that they didn't get to like do some of the socializing that we have to then figure out how to do elsewhere versus we give them the phone and we're already starting to see a lot of the data on like I'll just speak for myself as an adult all the impact on attention and all of the any number of other kinds of things. So I say this with like zero judgment and all the empathy because it's stuff that I'm trying to navigate as a parent myself. That said, I think there's kind of two pieces. We're talking one about safety, about how do we keep our kids safe. On that one, I am actually quite conservative, right? So anything that is algorithmic, that is built and meant for greater consumption. So I mean all the social media apps, I mean YouTube, I mean like anything again that has an algorithm behind it and has a metric for more time in app, incentivizing more time in app. We do not, generally speaking, we either do not let the girls on it, like that is not a thing that our family allows, or there are very, very strong limits put in place. But by and large, I think algorithmic products are not in line with our values for just like endless consumption. And things that are hard with that is even like a Netflix that just starts another episode after and things like that. So there are no perfect things there. What I would hope for was more stringent boundaries and limits that were placed in the product. So I didn't have to be the heavy on all of these. But here we are. On the other side, we're talking about how do we I don't even know. Like, how do we raise kids that feel capable and bold and able to take on everything that is incredible about like what lies ahead of them? And for this, I really am trying to help them understand as much as I am too, like what are the benefits of like playing around with like all of these different tools? What is it that we need to feel good about? And then what is like, it's totally fine if we're not necessarily engaging with it. And then they'll figure it out themselves. On some of the like the digital privacy and all of those pieces, I think our schools are doing like a generally good way of like digital literacy. I think a lot of schools are tasked with that. So in so much as like we try to stay very like engaged on what are they learning and then having some of those conversations. But to be honest, I think my kids are learning way more than I was ever taught about this stuff. And so they're teaching me on like how should we think about like passwords or like who we trust and things like that. It would be very hypocritical of me to not invite my kids to be experimental on like in a test and try all of these different products. And so we do have like I think Claude Code is incredible. Like I think what it's able to do and build for like, without having to necessarily know all the parameters of like coding, I think is incredible. I think it allows people to have a problem in mind or something they want and help them connect to being able to be a builder before asking them to do all the theoretical work of like, here's JavaScript and here's HTML and here's all this stuff. And for kids, I think that can be hugely powerful. So both my girls are set up on Cursor and Claude Code and have their own little projects that they're going to be doing, in addition to the puzzle that we do IRL and the books that we're reading, again, in person. I think a lot about portfolio. I think you're never going to be able to limit the effects of any one thing. But in so much as you have like a portfolio of different things, you limit the aspects of any one kind of thing. And I think that's the best that I think I want to teach my kids to take risks. I think we need to help them not think about like this college or this job being the be all and end all. Maybe there was a time then when like I was starting my career that might have like we might have slipped through, although like I don't think that's necessarily the case. I want them to have as many mental models of the world. And one thing that I've like taken to kind of thinking about is like how do I help them think about physics, philosophy, and poetry? And I think about that because they're like three poles that are quite
Yeah.
different. But if you do that, if you learn physics, you learn about how the world works, like how are all of our physical world and like what are all the different mental models therein. If you think about philosophy, you are able to get outside of all of these thought loops and logical fallacies, and you can be a educated consumer of thinking. And then poetry, like, I think if you need to be conversant on like what the whole point of any of this is. And like as a human, like there's never going to be like poetry helps you understand like the limitations of the human kind of
Yeah.
experience. And so um that's like sort of like the first principled way of like how I try to think about some of these things. Not perfect by a long shot, but I think I try to think about like what are if we do our job of like helping the kids be really great thinkers and critical thinkers and like good humans, then I think the rest of it will just come. Like I can't predict even like 2 years from now, let alone like 5 or 10 or whatever. And I'm just trying to equip like really great humans that think critically about things and can learn.
That is that is so well put because like you're right, for the next generation, there's no pathway or roadmap into saying this is how education journey is going to pan out. This is your future career. You're going to be an engineer, a doctor. None of that is kind of like a straightforward path. So I think nurturing or fostering that sense of critical thinking and creativity while trying to experiment and like go big on all of these mental models is a neat script that a lot of parents should adopt instead of being extremely risk averse or on the other side of the spectrum saying all tech is bad. Because let's face it, tech is the future. So we just got to buck up and face it head on, right? And in this next part, I know you mentioned again in your Substack, in the age of AI, what are parents for? What would your answer be to that right now?
This was the question I had to sit with as I was trying to write the TED Talk. And this was like, this is like, this one gets you because presumably you can have a choice whether you use it or not, but presumably in like the not so distant future, we are going to be able to have entities, AI, robots, all this kind of stuff that can do the functional work of parents. It can do the caregiving part, it can wash dishes, it can, make your bed or like, cook. It will be able to tutor your kids, it would be able to coach. And so this is why I think I come back to the ultimate thing of like humans can just human, right? And like my job is and again, not to be like overly sappy, but I kind of just believe this is like my job is to bear witness, right? My job is to be here. It's to be present. It's to be imperfect and just try all of these different things. I think my girls, I hope, like they know that this thing called life is just like this crazy journey. We don't know how long we have. We don't know who we get to do it with entirely. But if they feel like they've got someone constantly in their corner, like unyieldingly just in their corner, I think that is for sure we're trying to equip them with our values and our skills and all of those types of things. But apart from that, I don't know. It's like this never ending thing about I was just talking to friends who have younger kids and they were sort of looking at me with like, now the older kids. And I think that's like the story that's the most beautiful story of parenthood. It's like you carry on this tradition, this like unending chain that it isn't just about my kids, it's about every kid. And again, not to make things like political, but I think a lot about like what is it that we owe all kids, all kind of people in our community? And so, yeah, I think about what are parents for in for sure my small, little, very privileged kind of world. But I think also about like, what is my duty as a adult amongst the other kids in the community? So I coach because I choreograph Indian dance. I want to be a person that can be there for other kids. that can be kind of that, I don't know, just another pillar. Because again, like the thing that I believe in is this idea of village, and it isn't just one or two people. And if I can be that other person for just like a couple other kids, I think that matters. I think presence and witness and grace, like words like that mean a lot to me, because those are the those are very human words. And those are the things I sit with, when my kids have a fever and I like can't
Mm.
do anything. The medicine is doing its thing. The doctor, there's no more things that the medicine or the machines can do. And what I can do is I can have their like head on my lap and I could be just like there. And that's
Mm.
when I feel my purpose in the greatest, where I have no questions, where I know exactly what my job is. Now, is that it for everyone? I don't know. But that is what I've kind of gotten to for myself.
So going back to really that intuition of being like that true, getting into that spirit of your true calling as a parent, right? And an extension being a village for everybody around you, as much as they're able to become that village for you. Wow, that sounds like a very beautiful future if you were to look at it from that perspective. Yeah.
I think the only thing I can do, which gives me hope in a time where there's like lots of things that could leave you hopeless, is I want my girls to feel that same sense of like exerting force in the world. Like if you see something, if you believe in a future and you can see it, then go forth. Like it's not, nobody is going to hand it to you. It's going to be a lot of hard work and it's still not assured. But on my part, that's also why I continue the work, because the work's not done. And I would much rather work on a hopeful, positive version that I can see and I think is totally possible rather than anything else.
So beautiful. Well, we've spoken for such a long time. We've uncovered and touched on so many different pillars. I want to keep talking, but I know that's not possible because maybe for another time. But I do love to do this one thing with my guests on the show. Before ending, I ask them one tech rule and one parenting rule of their household, something short, something pithy that other parents can take away.
Yeah, I don't know pithy. Well, so I'll start with the parenting one. I think one thing that we haven't fully kind of done, but I do like this idea of like in like a company having a set of like values or a motto or whatever else it is. One thing that has worked well for our family is having little mottos that we kind of go to, and it sort of like embeds values. But our motto is like always an adventure. And I think it was actually in my wedding vows with my husband. And it gives us a sense like a North Star as a
Mm.
family and in everything, which is like we will have this perspective of like, there's things like we went to India over the Christmas holiday and, like classic, like any big kind of trip, there's always going to be something that happens. And we were inadvertently in Singapore for longer than we expected. And it was our youngest who was like, well, always an adventure. And like any number of different times. I think the idea of having like short little like mottos or like little things, we also like another one is like, well, we're a sharing family. And so like when we're trying to navigate something, that's like not necessarily a rule, but it's a thing that's served us really well, especially because you go through all of these phases. Like your kids are 2 and then they're 6 and then they're 14 all of a sudden. And if you have these little things, they don't have to be perfect and they evolve and you try some out and some stick and some don't. But by the time they're like now into this age, et cetera, they really do kind of stick. And then the technology one, I think I already mentioned it, but in general, like I am such a techno optimist in general.
Mm.
But having said that, the predominant technology in our lives, I think, is built with a value set that doesn't necessarily align with ours. And so the biggest place is the right idea of limits and boundaries.
Mm.
I very much believe in constraints and boundaries. I think they serve a really great purpose because where you have that, you can have a lot of freedom inside of it. Of that, you spend a lot of energy in enacting those boundaries. And so for our part, we generally love to use technology that has boundaries like built in. Examples are there's lots of like really cool like analog types of things like if you still have one, but like an iPod was a really great one, like especially the iPod
Yeah.
Shuffle. It was literally a little thing. You loaded up like however many songs and then you just went for a run or hit play. I have a little typewriter that has an e-ink display. It's beautiful. It's probably my favorite kind of possession. I'm able to type on it and I can send it to Google Docs when I want to. But these are really great little idea. It's not about shunning technology. It's about finding the kind of technology that fits for your life. And so that's maybe like a rule or like a
A
lens we
motto.
try to use.
Yeah.
Yeah. For how our family kind of looks at it, we want the types of technology that have like already embedded boundaries so that we can then feel very comfortable in like playing.
That is so beautiful. Well, Avni, thank you so much for sharing so many nuggets of brilliant concepts, ideas, the mental care model, all of these things tying back to supporting families, creating tech that doesn't exploit or doesn't take from you, but rather enables you, uplifts you, and also supports you for the future. I'm going to drop the link to your Substack in the bio below. Please do check Avni out and give her a shout out. Thank you so much for joining today.